dead for 20 years. Old records are filling up the charts, and dead musicians are big business. All this had more to do with this man than you might think. Ironically, while raising money for Ethiopia, Bob Geldof created the marketing man's dream, the greatest music commercial ever made.
It's no time to be afraid. It's Christmas time. Dead and light vanishing.
Live Aid changed a lot of things in a lot of quite complicated ways. The first thing it did, most noticeably, was it provided rock music and rock musicians with a sustaining myth, a reason for being which extended beyond the sales of records and the manufacturing of top 10 hits. It provided them with a kind of global importance which they really hadn't had since the late 1960s. What Live Aid seemed to do quite cleverly, without ever subscribing particularly to any kind of notions of an alternative society, Live Aid actually changed the way everybody saw pop musicians.
Well, tonight, thank God it's them instead of you. Everyone!
With a magic wand, they were addressing themselves to a serious problem, global famine, and making a very creditable job, actually making the politicians look stupid, which again they hadn't done since the 60s, not since the Vietnam War.
I think the downside was that the marketing men and the record companies suddenly saw these great charity events as a way of selling product. So almost immediately, the performance had become devalued because it was suddenly they were pushing their product.
It would suddenly focus a whole generation's attention back on music. This is the generation which had really turned its back on music in the late 60s, early 70s, and it focused it all back on music and of how great music was. What great value, what entertainment, what power it had, and how important it was on your life. So I think what it really did is it took a generation and focused it, and with that plus the CD coming through, and the timing was absolutely mirrored to the rise of the CD.
CD has undoubtedly been responsible for generating an enormous amount of cash in that it effectively doubled the unit price of the main music carrier from, £5, £6 for a black vinyl LP to something like 10, 11, 12 for a CD. It also brought back into the market an enormous number of people who are lapsed record buyers, who'd got out the habit. And what happens with something like CD is people buy a new bit of tackle for their front room, and it's a thing that has considerable attractions in terms of the quality of sound and the indestructibility and so forth. But it also, once they've got that little black box for their living room, they want to go and feed it.
By and large, we have been starved of the hit records turning into hit artists, turning into album performance so we could sell. I think as a result, we have fewer new artists developing. And since we have to sell albums for our living, we're back into the catalog selling. That desperate men do desperate things. But our catalog use, some is CD in 1990, a lot was the fact that we had to find something to sell. We didn't have a million-selling Rod Stewart album. We didn't have any new artists or artists delivering big albums. Catalog is our only haven.
Back catalogue, I think very obviously has become more important to the industry because it's already been made, the music's been researched, it's been mixed and it's finished, and it was sitting on the shelf gathering dust. And the original people who bought it as they get older perhaps want to buy it again for nostalgic reasons.
the explosion of reissues or cover versions of old songs or old favourites, I think, is just an example that people want music that is timeless. They may have never heard the Righteous Brothers. They may never have heard of Benny King's Stand By Me. I had the luxury of growing up with those records, but some 15-year-old or 16-year-old today, those records don't exist. And they're brand new music, and they're great.
Any major corporation has to be concerned about effectively building its back catalogue. That's what it's there for. But that back catalogue at the moment is actually getting in the way of a lot of new music. In fact, the only other thing that appears to me that's on the chart apart from dance records is a lot of old records. And the old records come from films, and they come from advertising, TV advertising in particular. And that's, in a sense, getting in the way. I mean, you know, how many times do we need to hear these old records? They're just clogging up the charts as far as I'm concerned.
People try to put us to down, talking about my generation, just because we get around, talking about my generation, things they do look awful, talking about my generation, I hope I die before.
Sales of 60s music is booming. Back catalogue accounts for 40% of weekly album sales. While some say this is down to the clever manipulation of nostalgia, others feel that it's because the 80s have left us in a musical and social vacuum.
We all say
A lot more was happening in the 60s. A lot of things were changing, fashion, music, everything. People's attitudes, social problems, things like that were actually moving faster and changing, whereas in the end of the 80s, early 90s, it seems to be pretty stagnant, especially as regards fashion and music. In the 80s was a very boring, bland decade in a lot of ways. So the 60s were definitely more exciting, bright, colourful, fun.
In the 60s, you could definitely feel the optimism and the way people were feeling from the music. I mean, I wouldn't dream of saying that 60s artists, music artists, were more or less talented than the artists today, but the pure expression of what they were feeling and what they felt like came through in their music, which was very optimistic a lot of the time, with a few exceptions, obviously, who were the other way round.
Name? Robbie Krieger. Age? 22 years old.
Occupation?
Guitar. Name?
John Densmore.
Age?
23.
Occupation?
Percussionist.
Raymond Daniel Manzarek. Age? Born 2/12/39.
Occupation?
Musician, organist.
Name? Jim. Occupation?
It's clear why kids are looking back to the music of the 60s today is because their doors have no peer today. There's plenty of good music being made as far as entertainment's concerned, but there's nothing with the passion and the poetry and the power of the Doors or Jimi Hendrix or the early Stones or the early Who. There's just nothing that even approaches that.
Robbie Krieger, guitar player.
John Densmore, percussionist, 22 years old.
Pamela Morrison, ornament.
Raymond Daniel Manzarek, 1/2/12/39, musician.
Name, occupation?
Jim.
There's no question that with the arrival of this new film about the Doors, which is coming out this spring, that we're going to be given another tremendously cleaned up, tidied up version of the 1960s and a romanticization of everything that happened then. And of course, it's going to be allied, no doubt, to a tremendous sales push on Doors albums and various other kind of memorabilia. It happens every year now. I mean, we've become extraordinarily anniversary conscious. Last year it was Jimi Hendrix, the 20th anniversary of his death. A few years ago it was the 20th anniversary of Sgt. Pepper. It's almost become institutionalized in the pop world now, that when nothing else is happening, you can always be sure that something did happen 20 years ago.
I always hoped that Hollywood would recognize that the Jim Morrison Doors story transcended its subject matter, that the story had what I consider to be the ingredients of classic Greek tragedy, a tragedy being defined as the story of one who knows of his untimely demise, yet chooses to fulfill his tragic destiny anyway, which was what Jim did. And Oliver Stone doesn't judge the life, which is one of the aspects of the film that I like. It simply shows Jim's more outrageous behavior, granted, as it was, with no apologies. Jim chose to be excessive and chose to die young and chose to test the bounds of reality to create art. And that's what the guy did.
The mood I get from most of it is kind of a heavy, kind of a sort of gloomy feeling, you know, like of someone not quite at home.
Jim Morrison wasn't that wonderful a person. I don't see the point of making a film about someone who is just, you know, a write-off, megalomaniac write-off, and not very talented. He was a legend in his own mind. I just think it's an excuse to get a pretty boy with long hair and tight leather trousers on the screen. I mean, that's nice, that's fine if you like that sort of thing.
I can do anything!
Jim Morrison, the god of rock.
The guys at Network have told us that they have a little problem with the lyric, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher." They asked if you could say instead, "Girl, we can't get much better." Can you dig that?
Girl, we couldn't get much higher.
It's interesting to see how everybody has a different take on Jim. I mean, he's still causing trouble. Some see him as a shaman, some see him as a drunken asshole, some see him as a martyr, some see him as this sensitive, tortured poet, other people as this chubby kid that suddenly lost weight and was beautiful and could never handle it. Jim's still stirring the shit up, if pardon that expression. He's still making people think.
He's not just stirring the shit, he's also an advertising strategy. Like Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, and them, many of the 60s rock heroes have provided soundtracks for adverts. It's a way of grabbing the attention of the affluent 25 to 45-year-old consumer, who much TV advertising is targeted at.
One of the things that we were doing with Levi's is that we were trying to inform people that it was a classic garment, that it was an original. And in doing that, one, we tried to write original ideas, but also what we then did is when we said, well, music is very important to the culture of jeans, what sort of music do you use? And we naturally put together what we thought were classic pieces of music. So we had a classic garment, a classic visual story, and together with that, a classic piece of music. So we were looking for classics.
My all-time favourite song is I Heard It Through the Grapevine. To me, the writers wrote that for Marvin Gaye, or wrote it for a Motown artist. Marvin Gaye was the person, of course, that made it a hit. His performance of that song turned it from an ordinary piece of paper with words on to a piece of pop history. And to have Levi take that to sell jeans, to me, is betraying the writers who wrote it with a passion. And I know people say, yeah, but it went on to be a hit record. But the writer's share of it isn't equal to the amount of jeans that Levi sold. So therefore, to me, I just don't, that's commercialism to me. That's taking a writer's talent to the ultimate, which I don't personally believe should be allowed.
If you're using an older piece of music, one, time is the great critic, as everybody says, so you can sort the good out from the bad, so to speak. And I think that what happens in that situation also is people become more unified about what they like and dislike. Whereas if I take a piece of music that was in the charts yesterday, it has a very sort of fragmented attitude towards it. I mean, some people like it, some people don't like it. Even though it may have got to #1, it will sort of fragment people. Whereas if I take a piece of music from 10, 15, 20 years ago, there begins to be a consensus about that music that says, yes, that was good. it was one of the leaders of its time. It determined that period. Yes, we've all grown to appreciate it.
I think when the history of pop music in the last decade comes to be written, people will focus on the fact that it's been the packaging, the way in which the music is actually marketed, that has been the focus for most innovation. I mean, I think the growth, the enormous growth, for example, in things like stadium rock, to see how many people you can get into a stadium, that's become one of the main sort of areas of interest in the last 10 years. The advent of music in commercials, the advent of video, this stress on the carrier, most obviously again seen in CD. The format has almost taken over people's perception of the music.
Makes that crossover into pretty significant. When the two work together, it's, you know, that's wonderful. And television just made it explode, just explode. Overnight, almost. Because the album's been out for 8 months. Went from, 40,000 sales to 250,000. In this day and age, marketing is essential to get your point across, or it's not going to get seen.
Salesmanship has never been more sophisticated within the music business. A feature film, a video, and a soundtrack album can be marketed together in one carefully designed campaign. And the ad man's buzzword, synergy, describes how one image can sell several products simultaneously.
Synergy is something that is perhaps becoming more focused upon in the music business. And it's, again, using the point of if two people can do one job together, there is often a potential to do it twice as well. And a specific example to illustrate that would be the way that we cooperated with the makers of the film Pretty Woman in the marketing of the Pretty Woman soundtrack. We were able to make sure that there was a common image in the marketplace, and basically we were buying 2 hits for every pound.
Excuse me, sir. Exactly how obscene an amount of money were you talking about? Just profane or really offensive? Really offensive. I like him so much.
The music for the Pretty Woman soundtrack, I think, helped to make the movie current and helped it to have a very topical soundtrack. At the same time, it enabled us to expose artists of all different styles to a movie audience.
It must have been
I think what's happened in music is people are so desperate to make money that they water down what they want to say in the first place, and they become generalized in what they want to say. So love has become the universal language of music, but people aren't being very challenging with that voice. They talk about, it's as if they talk with one syllable. So one syllable language. They daren't kind of go into the dangerous zones. They daren't be irrational. They daren't be provocative.
It's so conservative. The business is so conservative. There's no room for mavericks. And I think that, if you like, rock and roll is about sex. It's about your own identity. It's about kids sitting in their room and they want to be that person because they're everything they're not. They want to be this wonderful, this wild, this sexy person. There's no room for that now. It's all homogenized. the great, you know, the mavericks of the music business have gone. They're all subdued, and they're all slaves to their accountants.
The music industry has never been more successful financially, but commercial pressure is proving to be a straitjacket. The lure of easy profits has encouraged the industry to avoid taking risks and ignore its lifeblood, new talent. In part 2, we find out why.
I just wanted to dump the whole history of rock music, the past 30 years, you know, the Elvis Presley, Marvin Gaye, James Brown, the Beatles, Bob Dylan, the Velvet Underground. I just didn't want to know about it anymore. And the whole traditional idea of what the classic song was. And I wanted to get out of music altogether and do something else. Sometime in '87, I started buying the Chicago records, the house records from Chicago and Detroit. And I loved those. I loved them mainly because most of them were instrumental, or if they weren't instrumental, they'd have a female singer singing about nothing that you could ever write about. I loved the idea that these records had been made that journalists couldn't sort of write pages about. There was no reference points in them, but they were very, very exciting.
KLF is gonna rock you. KLF is gonna rock you.
Dance music sprang out of the underground club scene, and its popularity took the mainstream music industry by surprise. From the production methods to people's reasons for listening to it, dance is the opposite of everything the majors like music to be.
In the beginning, when Soul Soul was trying to get their first gig in terms of a deal, you know, it was a lot of hard work, and obviously not everybody has, you know, got that kind of, like, I guess, organisation going. So, you know, it's quite difficult initially to get into, and the fact now you're finding that it is more and more hard for you to approach a major, because the whole, you know, situation, I guess, with the dance thing, I don't think, you know, when it came along during the 80s and that, you know, it lived the time in terms of crossing over. And, you know, those who managed to cross over at that time are probably fortunate enough to be at the right place at the right time. And then, you know, the doors will close again.
The record industry gets itself at it. First they ignore it and try and pretend it isn't happening and hope that it goes away. And then it doesn't go away. So what it then does is its normal way, it pulls out its checkbook and runs around and gives everybody £30,000 for anything that sounds like a dance record. And of course instantly kills all the creativity and instantly kills all the success of it. Because you can't do that with dance music. Because dance music, by the very animal that it is, needs to be left alone. And needs to be nurtured by the guys that are making it.
I don't decry dance records at all. I think that's silly. But simply, it's a genre that has reached its limit, or has reached a point now in which it's records made not with artists who go on stage, not with artists who perform in public, not with artists who've had long-term careers, not with artists who've been grafting in clubs or elsewhere. It's the springing out of the minds of technical people who are musically based, musically trained, but nonetheless are making records in a way that isn't with flesh and blood.
There's a notion of what something's worth in the industry that's all about authenticity. And what people think is authentic is effectively a singer-songwriter rock format. That's what the majors really see as selling truckloads of records. I see it a different way. I think the most important thing is to be coming up with new ideas that people react to and are interested in. And if that happens to be from the dance field, then that's where the industry should be looking.
Something has gone wrong. Something has gone wrong. Let the bass kick.
The only thing that dance music hasn't really achieved yet is it hasn't thrown up enough acts, it makes great music, but the music tends to be one-off singles or 4 or 5 minutes of dance music, and that's it. And the artists you often don't hear of again.
The biggest artists currently selling albums are all from the dance world. Madonna, Prince, to name but two. MC Hammer last year, Alexander O'Neill. More recently, the #1 record, the KLF, still an indie, by the way, have all come out of the dance world. And they'll sell albums because they're growing. They use the whole single format, the whole dance culture, to bring new ideas in, to use new ideas and put them together, to grow creatively.
With a lot of the singers that we had, yes, it was an opportunity. And for a lot of the singers that we're going to be developing over the years, it's continued to be another opportunity, because a lot of the singers that we've worked with in the past has now gone on and, and developed into, fully pledged musicians and now taken seriously. So it's definitely been a developing stage, and that's what I think has been always missing. And that's the gap what I think we filled in the whole industry. And since then, it's really hard, when you haven't got much money or anything and you've got the talent and nobody really wants to take you that seriously.
This thing called life.
Now what's the meaning of the line? Tell me. Well, it's like dreaming of your goals, ambitions. I'm feeling free. I'm on this mission to achieve.
Achieve what?
What's in your mind?
Warehouse in the middle of nowhere in an unpopular and unfashionable town in the north. The fact is that people do, and they want to do that. And that is what the record business should be about, supplying that demand.
There is another reason for the unsuccessful relationship between dance and the majors. More than any other area of music, dance depends on the single. Having once been the essential format in the industry, why do the majors now find the single increasingly irrelevant?
You can't make as much money out of a single. That's what the difference is for major record companies. And you can't build up an allegiance to an act, a serious allegiance to an act with a 7-inch single, a 12-inch single. People enjoy them for what they are. But when somebody's bought an album, it's like you've committed yourself to that act. Even when you first hear the album, you don't quite like it, but I've paid for it, I better listen to it 3 or 4 times, and then suddenly you convince yourself and you suddenly are into it. And you're maybe halfway to buying their next album.
I think the single has always been the leader into the music of the artist. In other words, an easy introduction from an album to get the artist known. And I don't think that's changed much. The thing that's changed is that sales have gone down. And it's a much less valuable vehicle for us. We used to sell millions and make profit. Now we sell hundreds of thousands and think of it as a promotional tool.
Let the bass kick.
The overwhelming drive on the part of the majors was to ignore the single, which is the classic pop form and the form for it breaking a new group, for new music in effect, in favour of the CD. This was highlighted first by Pete Waterman and Stockaker Waterman, the producers, who cleaned up throughout 1987, 88 and 89 because they were one of the few people aggressively going out and courting the audience that the majors had ignored, which was the classic teenage singles audience. And they had a ridiculous amount of hits in those 3 years because of that fact.
The record industry as such would rather there not be such a thing as a single, because it's an animal that's very difficult to predict. The artist is of little importance to the public when it comes to singles. They either like the record or they don't like it, and they don't buy it just because it's so-and-so or it's this or it's that. So quite often you can have a #1 single by an artist, and then when the record company would love a #1 follow-up, so make the album work, they don't often have a hit with their follow-up. So in real terms, it's a pain up the arse to the record industry, the single.
There's no conspiracy to get rid of a vinyl single. There's just the fact that the public don't want it. We make vinyl singles, they buy them less and less. This is really a business of responding to, as any entertainment business is, you respond to public taste. And if the public don't buy vinyl, after a certain point of time, you actually economically have to say we can't make it anymore.
Vinyl itself is quite a democratic thing to be playing around with. You can get access to it fairly easily if you're an independent company, if you're an independent producer, if you're a DJ or remixer. It's not very expensive, it's not going to take you a lot of time. If you've got one great idea, you can put it onto vinyl and test the market. That's how new music and new ideas has been brought through. You can go from a studio straight to the cutting room to the dance floor, and that's a process that has brought through a lot of very famous people in the last 5 years.
People always see popular music as somehow having a duty, that it is there to represent the kids, you know. And when people grow out of their teenage years, they still look back on pop music in that way. And I think sometimes they expect it to perform that same function for the next bunch of kids. And there's really no reason why it should do, any more than the movies or television or any other form of expression.
One of the things that has been forgotten during the last 10 years by a lot of the people who market records and write about records and the whole apparatus that is around pop, is that furious rage of the 18 or 19-year-old who's pissed off at the world and is not old enough to feel vulnerable. That will always recur because of the nature of English society, because of the incredible lack of opportunity open to people, because of the fact that we're an urban society, because of the fact that despite everything, popular music is still one of the few areas in our society where people can talk about what's really on their minds.
When we looked around our surroundings and our environment back in Wales, we always thought, we just always wondered why a band like us never came from it.
Yeah.
Because it's such a vacuum. That kind of, you know, there's no obvious chance for a band like us to come from something like that. And we're glad we come from it.
Yeah, I mean, we are really glad we come from there because we just mirror everybody's frustration. Everybody feels exactly like this. But, I mean, articulation is not available to everybody. If you get it, you know, it's a fact that factory jobs do instill boredom in your brain and kill you. It's a scientific fact. And that's where everybody's got where we live. I mean, so they just get out of their skulls on a Friday and beat each other up.